Okay, so welcome everyone to the 2022 forecast and my predictions for the year. And forecasts and predictions, you know, there's an overlap there. Some things sound like they're forecasts, some sound like they're predictions. I guess, you know, you could use the words interchangeably, really. But anyway, I put both words there because I am making predictions and they're general forecasts as well. So if you don't know me, I'm Gary O'Toole, Timeline Astrology. If you're watching this on playback, thank you for those who have arrived here live. For those who are here live, of course, please maybe jot down questions and leave your questions for the end. I'm happy to take questions at the end of this presentation. And let's get through it. So 2022, I guess when you're doing forecasts and predictions for a whole year, and I tend to look at obviously the top end of the year, maybe the beginning of the year, middle, and less so at the end of the year, because it is a bit like weather forecasting. The further out you go, the kind of it gets a bit more vague, and it's actually harder to make predictions the further out you go. It's a bit like weather forecasting in that way, but you do get a sense of a year when you've been looking at it long enough. And I do want to say that even though I think that 2022 is going to be, well, let me put it this way. No year, of course, is like in a vacuum. It obviously arrives, you know, after the previous year, and it leads to the following year. So you can't take it out of context. But and there's a kind of storyline that's moving on here, and that's always the case. But the sense I get from 2022, and I'm trying to stay away from language like good, bad, and you know, better or worse, because there's always good and bad. There's always better and worse in different areas of life. And I think that there will be some really challenging aspects this year, as there is every year, but that's never different. That's always the case. But there's also a lot of things that are very positive as well. So you have challenges every year, you have positive things every year, things that are easeful. So, and that's why in astrology, we always use the planets like the malefics and the benefics. That's why we call them that. We don't use the words good and bad, but that's really what we're saying. Benefics are good, malefics are bad. And bad doesn't always mean bad, because sometimes you want the malefics in an area of your life that you need to fight for. So maybe you need to be a badass, in other words. And so when you're having Mars and Saturn come into some zone of your life, maybe it's good to kind of tackle some issues. So that's good. So I always like to think of it as, and I always say this, everything is good for something. Everything is good for something, no matter how bad you might label it in other instances. So then you have the more benefic, easeful planets like Jupiter and Venus, and that's really easeful this year because, or things are easing up this year because of that, because Jupiter is moving into Pisces in its own sign. There are complications around that, of course, but there's just a lot more easefulness around that. So that's a lot better. Again, it's very hard to stay away from like good and bad, worse and better, but you know, that's what it is. It is a lot better. But there are lots of challenges, so we'll go through that as well. So let's, before we jump in here, I don't know why it doesn't want to move on now. Okay, so I just wanted to mention that if you haven't already seen the magazine, or if you don't have a copy of the magazine as a patron, or you haven't looked at it online, that's where, you know, a lot of this information is, especially in terms of the actual transits and the conjunctions and the ingresses into different signs and all of that. All of the themes are there, and it's all about the transits. So have a look at that. It's timelineastrology.com. Before we jump into the actual predictions and my forecast and all of that, let's chant for Ganesh. So this is a nice, simple, short mantra for Ganesh, and it's Om Gang Ganapataye Namah. And I might say it 12 times if you'd want to say it along with me or just listen. And maybe one for each of the signs of the zodiac. Om Gang Ganapataye Namah. 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 Om Ganganapadaye Namah. Om Ganganapadaye Namah. Om Ganganapadaye Namah. Om Ganganapadaye Namah. So this picture here is actually taken at a place called Victoria's Way, and now it's called, actually used to be called Victoria's Way. It's now called Victor's Way. And it's in County Wicklow. It's south of Dublin. If you're ever in Dublin, it's an hour drive south of Dublin. And it has all of these massive granite statues of Ganesh. And it's a very meditative place. You go in, it's kind of got a whole ring of Ganesh all around as you enter this huge area. And then you go through, and it's a whole journey that it takes you on with all of these different statues. And it's like a journey of life, basically, an amazing area with ponds and huge place. And a forest where he says you can go forest bathing. It has these specially designed chairs where you lie back and just look up at the trees. It's just a whole day out kind of thing. If you're ever in Ireland and Dublin, that's definitely worth a visit. So this is Ganesh here, the Lord of Vedic Astrology. So now, before we get into the actual transits and forecasts, well, I want to just mention that, of course, this is general in nature. So one person's utopia is another's dystopia. That's a nice saying here, that, you know, it's like one man's poison and all of that. So, of course, your individual cycles and circumstances, and in Indian astrology, we refer to these as dashas, your planetary cycles, as well as sign-based cycles. They are more important than any transit. And your own chart, your own pattern, all your patterns. So your circumstances and your patterns, of course, mean that you're going to experience the transits very differently to anyone else. No two people are going to experience the transits in any of the same way. So as well as place, and this is a whole concept of astrocartography, that actually by moving different places, you're strengthening certain things in your chart also. So that also has an impact. But to ask yourself 3 questions, I would say, when you look at any transit, first of all, what is your chart? What's promised in the chart? Because no matter what a transit's doing, for example, if you have the best Jupiter transit in the world, but your Jupiter is maybe, you know, not, you know, that strong in your chart, well, you have to obviously qualify that and say that, well, okay, maybe it's not going to be the biggest boom in my life, but it might be a bigger or a sense of growth in some way, but it might not be the huge boom that someone else with a very strong, powerful Jupiter, very prominent in their chart, would have. So you have to qualify it in terms of your own chart. The second thing to ask yourself, is it activated in the cycle? So again, this is to do with your own personal cycles, planetary or sign-based. What's active in your chart? That's more important than the transits. If you know what planets, you know, active in your chart, that's the third question. Are your cycles triggered by transit? Look at the planet that's triggered. So if you're in a Mars cycle, look at Mars this year. Really focus on what I'm saying about Mars. If you're in a Jupiter cycle, focus on Jupiter, and so on. So that's what I'm going to say about the transits. And here are the main transits for the year. So there's always lots going on every year. And it does seem that 2022 has a lot going on, by the way. But then you could say about that about any year. But the last 2 years, as much as happened, I don't even know if that's the right way of saying that, but a lot didn't happen also. And it was all to do with things grinding to a halt. So it's like things happen, yes, but things didn't happen in another way. And things are going to start happening in 2022. And I was a bit naive actually to say in the beginning, when Saturn first moved into Capricorn, that, and my prediction was like the beginning of 2020, when I did my forecast, I was like, people are just going to start changing their lives. You know, everybody's going to change their life. And that's what I could see. And of course, that is what's happening. But it's like we don't change our life until we're forced to. So that's what Saturn is. We usually put it off until the very last, that we can't really keep going this way until we just really have to change. And that's why Saturn transits a sign 2.5 to 3 years in the sign. It's at the end of it that we can't keep going on this way, and we have to make changes. Just like at the end of a Saturn cycle, it's at the end of a 3-year cycle that you have to make the changes. You don't make it on day one. Day one, you're like, oh, I don't know what's going on here, or like, you know, day 200, what is going on here? But at the end of it, it's like, okay, I need to make changes. So that's, Saturn is playing a big part in all of our lives these days by being so strong. And so it forces changes in our life, and we don't make them overnight. We're not going to break up with someone overnight. we're not going to change jobs overnight or do whatever we're going to do. Saturn slowly forces our hand. So people are going to be making a lot of changes this year. In other words, this is when it starts in earnest. Even though a lot of people have been forced to, a lot of people are going to actually decide to, I believe, this year. So let's go through them. The first thing to say is that Venus and Mars are together for a long time this year, from January to March. And they're exactly together from February 11th to March 12th, same degree, within the same degree. So this is called a planetary war, where two planets jostle for space. And, you know, Venus and Mars create a lot of passions, of course, but that could be good or bad. There's that, you know, those words, good or bad again. So Venus and Mars are currently in Sagittarius. So somebody killing somebody for their beliefs is not good for the person being killed or the person killing. So it's like, it depends on what context you're saying it. You know, in the bedroom, it might be good. In, you know, on the pulpit, it might not be so good. In someone like lashing out on someone else for whatever beliefs that they have. Mars and Venus, well, how are you going to use it yourself? Of course, I mean, you know, we're all going to use it in our own way. We're all going to use our passions in our own way, but we're not going to, you know, just ignore this. There's a lot of energy and heat and passion. And yes, that could spill out into anger building right now. And it's in Sagittarius, and then it moves into Capricorn. While it's in Sagittarius, it's certainly a lot more heated in terms of our belief systems. And as it moves into Capricorn in February and they come together exactly, it might be a bit more detached, but it's still a lot of heat that needs to be contained and focused. And that's something I'll get to in a minute when Mars meets with Saturn. But the other complication that's happening for the beginning of the year, January to April, is this what's called Kālsarpa Yoga. Kal means time, Sarpa is serpent, yoga is combination. So Kālsarpa Yoga is the serpent of time, as it's called. And it means that all of the planets now are on one side of the nodes. And it began as soon as Mars moved across the nodal axis. The lunar nodes are the north node, Rahu, and the south node, Ketu. And these two show this kind of, I always relate to the tarot card, the Wheel of Fortune. There's this kind of sense of things being fated and sort of up and down and sort of out of control in a way as well, or out of your control, it seems. And this Kālsarpa Yoga intensifies things and exaggerates things. And so whatever is there, it's exaggerated it. And that could be, again, for better or worse. I'll talk more about this. The new year, of course, in the Indian or the Vedic calendar actually isn't until April 1st. So we, you know, it's not January 1st in that sense. It just so happens to be April 1st this year. It's the new moon basically on April 1st in Pisces. This is actually better news because the name of the year is called Śubhakṛta. So Śubh is basically auspiciousness. So there is some auspicious energy this year. Now, having said that, I don't take this as the only aspect because look at the last, you know, years, and if you look at the trends here, it doesn't always play out like this exactly, but there's an undercurrent, you could say, and this is related to Jupiter and Saturn's transits, and there's a relationship between them I'll go through in a while. Jupiter and Neptune are going to come together and then move into Pisces. Now, this is the key thing going on for the year. This is the big thing going on for the year, and that happens in April, and this is going to really create this sense of upliftment and connection again. And we're going to feel more connected and so much more. I'm going to talk more about that. And then Saturn is actually going to leave Capricorn briefly in the summer and move into Aquarius and then return to Capricorn in the autumn and winter. And that's also significant because obviously then 2022 isn't out of the woods yet, but it's kind of like at the edge of the woods and we can see the opening, you know, and then we've stepped out and we're like, you know, it's like if you've been imprisoned long enough, you know, you step out and it's kind of like, oh, I don't know if I want to go too much further out there. And then you kind of step back and back into even the safety of your imprisonment. And then you step out again. And that's what it's going to feel like this year. So that's Saturn. I'll talk more about that. Then Saturn, therefore, continuing in Capricorn, continues with Pluto. So there is still this end times feel, unfortunately. And whether it's the pandemic, whether it's climate change, whatever it is, war now added to the list, because that is certainly added to the list this year. it always has this end times feel when Saturn and Pluto come together. So in the last time they were together was the early 80s, and same thing. It was AIDS epidemic, it was Cold War, all the same. So, well, obviously different faces, different places, different viruses, but the same quality, Saturn, Pluto. Rahu and Ketu's entry into Aries and Libra is also a big shift. This is also in April. Everything's changing in April, by the way. Everything is changing in April. And this is an important shift I'll talk about as well. And by that stage, this Kālsarpa Yoga, which is very uncertain, it creates this kind of slippery, lopsided, sort of extreme, view of things. And it's a bit extreme. And that's finishing by the time the nodes move. But things are really heating up in July, August, like really heating up. I mean, they are heating up in January, February, March because of Venus and Mars, and the passions are heating there and beyond into April. Certainly in April, with all the changes going on, there's a lot of heat there and a lot of potential for, I'm going to hate using this word, but there is the potential for war this year. But this is certainly potential for war in July, August, when Uranus, Rahu, and Mars. Uranus is one of the outer planets, Rahu, the north node of the moon, the shadow planet, which is like Uranus, and Mars all come together, and they're going to square Saturn. That's warlike situations going on there in the summer. And then finally, Mars is doing a lot of funky things this year, really funky things. First of all, it started with Mars in a very strong position in Scorpio, in its own sign. It's still very strong, and Mars is very strong for a lot of the year. It's going to exalt then as it meets with Saturn in conjunction in March, April, and it's going to square Saturn in July, August, when it's in its own sign Aries, conjunct Uranus and Rahu. So it's very strong all of this time, but it's in really heated situations. And then it's going to end the year retrograde from October until January next year. It's going to be really complicated this year with Mars. And at the same time, Rahu, the north node, is entering Aries, Mars' sign, and really blowing it up and exaggerating all of the Mars type themes. So that's why war is really likely this year. Now, hopefully it's not full out war and it's like skirmishes and this and that, whatever. But the potential is there. Sorry to say. So this is the thing I mentioned about Saturn and Pluto, is that they've been together not just the last 3 years, and that's normally what they come together when Saturn moves into a sign for 3 years. They've been together for like nearly 6 years by the time they're over. This has been really drawn out. That's because Pluto was in Sagittarius initially when Saturn moved in 2017. And then they both moved into Capricorn in 2020. And they're still together until 2023. It's just that Saturn breaks out of it briefly this summer. And so we have this Doomsday Clock, which is basically what I found really interesting. I didn't know this until I looked at the Doomsday Clock, that it was actually founded in 1947 when Saturn and Pluto came together, opposite where they are now. So the actual Doomsday Clock was initiated at the time of Saturn and Pluto coming together in Cancer, and now they've come back together again in Capricorn. And it's like, whoa, of course, a Doomsday Clock, because you want to put two words together to describe Saturn and Pluto, it's Doomsday Clock. The clock is Saturn, the Lord of Time. Doomsday is Pluto. So this Saturn-Pluto conjunction leads to this kind of doom and gloom sort of outlook. I mean, it's prediction. It's like, it's not necessarily real either. A lot of things are, of course, a lot of these things occurred, but a lot of it is like just predicting that, well, obviously it is just been a prediction all along. The world hasn't ended. So it's like the world isn't ending, but like, there are obviously this sense of that, we're under threat here, whether it's nuclear threat as it is, right now, as what they're claiming in 2022, nuclear threat, climate, of course, that's a threat at the moment, disruptive technologies, COVID-19, that's where we're at right now. So anyway, that's Doomsday Clock. And until Saturn, so again, Saturn makes it out in the summer, so there's going to be ease up on that. And then it goes back in July, but it makes it out again January 2023 and then doesn't go back. So they're going to break up in January 2023. So that's the good news. So really, in a way, I suppose 2022 is a bit of like a slow release. And again, almost like being captive, held captive, released, and then having to go back, or maybe even deciding to go back. When we think about, you know, maybe people not wanting to go step out to, like here in Ireland yesterday, they have lifted most of restrictions just like that. And it was like, it came out of the blue, and it's like, wait a minute, we needed warning for this. You know what I mean? So think about all those introverts were like, oh my God, do we have to go out again and mingle with people? But the thing is, it's that people aren't going to be ready for it. And then also, you know, the world isn't ready for it. It's like an engine that hasn't been started in a while. And it's like, you know, when you start an engine, your car that you've left for 2 years, it's going to take a while to get going again. So that's kind of what like 2022 is. So this Kālsarpa Yoga, again, and someone asked a question about this already. A patron has asked, well, what about children? This is a really good question. What about children born with such an intense chart? So if you're born around this time, of course, it means you have it in your chart. And when people have this in their chart, it is like, again, all the planets are on one side of the nodes, and they're all moving towards the north node Rahu. And Rahu currently is in Taurus. It shows a lot of extremes in the person. The person has a lot of extremes in their life. And one of the things that's usually expressed is the person is going one direction up until some point in their life where they go a completely different direction. It's like with the nodes, there's never sort of in between. It's always this way or that way. It's always extreme. So people have these extremes in their life where they kind of decide on, you know, and maybe not consciously either. Maybe it feels like, oh, my life has taken such a turn all of a sudden. There was this before this, and there was after this. There was this pre-me and post-me. And that's what the nodes are like. They're like this unconscious, shadowy aspects. Even though we might not be conscious of what we're doing, we're still doing it on some level. We're still creating the extremes. So then another thing I'll talk about is Mars and Saturn, because they're coming together, and that's going to really start to heat up as they come together in March and April. The exact conjunction is April 5th. So that's definitely one to put in your diaries and on your calendars. That is the time to be, you know, just slow down, be mindful of what you're doing. Mars is action, Saturn is focus. So if you can focus all your intention and attention on an action, on anything you're doing, then it's a better expression of this than getting really frustrated because things aren't happening fast enough. The problem here is that Mars is really strong, it's exalted. It's actually exalted by degree, but Saturn is really powerful too. And Mars has to pay heed to Saturn because Saturn's ruler of Capricorn. So it's like whatever you're doing, however powerful you feel, it's like there's a containment that's needed here. Now, of course, we can think about this in terms of the virus, because this is one of the signatures of the virus. Mars and Saturn were one of the kind of drivers of it. And do we think that maybe another wave, unfortunately, in April could come? Well, I actually think that maybe at this stage, because in April, by mid-April, Saturn will aspect Ketu in Libra. Ketu will move into Libra, the south node, which actually rules viruses. Ketu is literally the virus. And Saturn's aspect tends to contain things, thankfully. So my reading of that would be that perhaps there are breakouts, like virus breakouts, but only in certain regions. Now, I'm not telling you anything new there because that's what people are reporting, like experts in the science community. So I'm just reading it from the astrology chart now to say that actually that seems to confirm that there'll be sort of like pockets maybe, but maybe contained. This combination is called Yama Yoga. So it literally, Yama is the Lord of Death, and it's related to like Pluto. So we come back into Pluto territory again. But in yoga, if you practice yoga, you'll be aware of the yamas and niyamas in the discipline of yoga. And that's literally what yama means, discipline, restraint. So if you can discipline yourself at this time in April, then it's much better expression of this conjunction than trying to like scatter your energy and do loads. And because you are going to feel lots of energy on the one hand, because Mars is exalted, but it's again contained within Saturn, and they're going to be, you know, head to head. So one phrase I came up with is like instant karma. You know, Saturn is literally like karma, and Mars is instant. So think about, it's almost like when you have a Mars Saturn kind of thing in your chart, whether it's a conjunction or an aspect or whatever, I see it in people who can get very tense. Literally Mars rules the nerves and Saturn the muscle, and so people get really tense because they're the two malefic planets, and they drive us, and they force us into situations, and you know, we can really work with them, But it's kind of like if you're spiraling into if you're in a negative spiral, and you know that kind of like, oh, you know, as soon as I thought that, it happened. You know, you know, and it just kind of spirals out of control. That's the kind of Mars-Saturn type of thing. You know, it's like, oh, darn it, I'm gonna try and keep my language PC now, but it's like, oh, damn, and da 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 da, and then all of a sudden something else goes wrong, and then something else goes wrong. That's Mars and Saturn. You know what I mean? It's like, it just creates these struggles within yourself, and it's usually expressed through, like, you know, it starts with stubbing your toe, and then it just spirals, and your whole day goes off into a negative spiral. So really be mindful of this in March, April, leading up to the conjunction on April 5th, because there is a lot of power struggles going on in the world and in our relationships. Now, obviously, it's going to be more impactful on certain individuals than others, but there's a lot of power struggles. So whether it's between you and your partner or partners, or you and whoever, your child, whoever it is, there's power struggles going on at the moment. And in the world, of course, that is in governments, because this is in the sign Capricorn, where they come together. So focus all your will and energy on one task at a time is what I was suggesting there. Now, the other big news is that Saturn, well, this is not big news, it moves every year, one lunar mansion each year. This is another layer of astrology, of course, you might be familiar with. We have 12 sun signs, but we have 27 quote unquote moon signs or nakshatras. And so this nakshatra is called Dhaniṣṭhā. It bridges Capricorn and Aquarius. It's split halfway between Capricorn and Aquarius, 6 degrees, 40 minutes each. So Saturn is about to enter this next one. So we've had Saturn in Capricorn and different flavors of Saturn in Capricorn the last 2 years, and this is the third flavor now. And really, this Dhaniṣṭhā is probably the stronger one in a sense, because it's where Mars exalts, and the Dhaniṣṭhā itself, you know, is associated with Mars in the cycles at least. And so this Mars-Saturn connection is even stronger, therefore, and there's something about pushing something through. And one of the things about Dhaniṣṭhā is that it's ruled by the demigods, all of the elements that are required for you to fulfill whatever action you want to take, whatever you're trying to push through. And Saturn is the long haul, like the long-term goals that you have. And when it gets into Dhaniṣṭhā, it's very much about, okay, this and this and this and this and this and lots of things, like 8 different things, the vasus, there are 8 vasus. I need all of these elements to make this happen. And so that's why it's a good time to think about all of the elements and to think about people that might help you. So that's why I say here to, you know, get by with a little help from our friends, all the elements that are needed to achieve success. And so success is indicated by this sign oftentimes. Saturn, of course, could create like a spanner in the works here, for sure. It always does. But it's also about working hard towards a goal and getting there, and, you know, pronouncements and all of that. So the fact that, you know, when we think about drum and a flute being the symbols, it's like making an announcement. For example, victory over the whatever, you know, I'm not going to, you know, say that, but, you know, it's like making an announcement. It is likely that's going to be happening this year. So one of the things I said here is about dismantling the system and building a new one. That's because it bridges Capricorn and Aquarius. So when you break down the systems, the old systems, the Capricorn systems, Aquarius kicks in this summer, especially when it goes into Aquarius. And I mentioned that from April 28th to 13th of July, Saturn in Aquarius. That's going to show, it's going to preview, the bigger changes that are happening in 2023 and on. Right now, I guess 2022 is like, let's test this system out, this new system out, whatever that is in your life, whatever it is in the governments, you know, all things systemic. Let's test this out in the summer and let's see how it goes. And maybe it doesn't work the first time. And then we have to go back to the drawing board as Saturn goes back into Capricorn in July and into the end of the year. And then in the new year, then let's actually, okay, now this is how we're going to have to do this. Because Saturn generally, when it goes into a sign, it goes back to the previous sign, has some unfinished business, and it doesn't really get on with the job fully for the first time. It's only the summer, but it is at least a preview, a hint at what's coming in 2023. So that's Saturn. Now, this is something you can do for yourself. If you know your quote unquote moon sign, your nakshatra, the lunar mansions, if you know what sign your moon is in, you can count your you can count Saturn's transit from your moon sign. This is something you can do with all the planets, of course, but it's very handy to do with Saturn because it's a slower moving planet. And there are 7 different combinations you can have. There are 9. There are 27 lunar mansions altogether, and they're in 3 different sections, and so 3 nines basically. And so I'll show you this in the next slide. It'll make more sense. But basically, the first is where you start something. The second is where you grow. The third, where you pause. I'm being very nice in my language, very pleasant. People would use stronger words than pause. The fourth is where you secure something. The fifth is where you work. The sixth is where you attain. The seventh is where you change. The eighth, befriend, and ninth, connect. So these are the lunar mansions and their associated planets. The first is the South Node Ketu, and these are all the lunar mansions associated in the cycles. So basically, if you know, and of course I can't give this to you if you don't know it already, but if you know where your moon is, you check where your moon is. Say if it's in Uttara Phalguni, which is associated with the sun. So now you know Saturn is going into, and I should have highlighted it here, which I'll do now as well. Where is Mars? Here. So this one, I'm going to highlight this, bold it. If I can make it bigger, that'll be even better. No, that's not going to work. Okay, so I'll bold it there. So you can see this is where Saturn is going. And so you just need to figure out where your moon sign is. Say if it's in Uttara Phalguni, you count from there to there. So if your moon is in Uttara Phalguni, then it's the sun. So 1, 2, 3. So that therefore Saturn is impacting the third star from your moon sign. And that is about taking a pause, maybe. If it's in Ashwini, the first one, then you count from the South Node, Ketu. That's the first one, 2, 3, 4, 5. So for you, Saturn in Dhaniṣṭhā would be more about having to work and maybe being challenged to work as well. The 3rd, 5th, and 7th will challenge you to change something, always. And I'm using the word change for the 7th in particular because that will challenge you maybe more so. But all 3 of these, especially 3rd, 5th, and 7th, are going to challenge you to change. So you might have to take a pause for the first one. You might have to stop something. For the 5th one, you might be challenged literally and asked to show up for something. And for the 7th one, is probably more so that you're going to have to change something radical in your life. But that's only in relation to Saturn. I'm just talking about one planet here. It does it for all the planets. So that's one way. Now, if that's all too much for you, if you don't know your moon sign, of course, just let that slide, let it wash over you. If you are sort of there, but you're not quite there, I'm happy to take questions after. If you're watching the playback, also happy to take questions if you want to send in a message. So that's, anyway, the moon signs. So the next thing to talk about is Rahu Ketu. So I mentioned they're moving into Aries and Libra in April. So everything is happening in April, basically. It's all...
Oh, broken. Oh.
Oh, we've got a baby here. Okay. maybe the baby had something to say that might have been more interesting than what I'm about to say here and make more sense than what I'm about to say here with the nodes. Okay, once I start talking about the nodes, it gets a bit weird. And you have to just bear with me. We're talking about shadows. We're talking about, they're not planets, they're not physical entities, they're shadows, literally. They are, when they line up with the sun and moon, there's an eclipse. And I'll talk about the eclipses and all of that. So Rahu is moving into Aries, the north node, and Ketu, the south node, into Libra. So that means Rahu's taking the shadow off Gemini because it has an aspect on Gemini. So is this the end of the infodemic? Maybe, maybe. The infodemic, if you don't know that phrase, that it was invented by the media that actually made the infodemic thing. I guess, I don't know, maybe it was social media, happened as soon as Rahu moved into Gemini. So it was a concurrent, but it always happens this way, by the way, because as soon as Rahu goes into Gemini, Ketu moves into Sagittarius, where in Mula, especially the beginning of Sagittarius, the pandemic started. So Ketu is literally the virus, but Rahu is like the virus of the mind in Gemini, and it's infodemic. There's too much information, but it's moving away from it, so it's taking the pressure off Gemini. That's also good for actually anyone who's got Gemini prominent, rising sign, and all of that. So it's moving out of Taurus. So in a way, it might unmask Taurus, because literally Taurus, Remember, when Rahu moved into Gemini, we also were obsessed with washing our hands. Gemini rules the hands. And then when Rahu moved into Taurus, it's all about obsessed about masks. Taurus is the face. And now it's moving out of Taurus. At least that will take off the pressure there as well. So people might be taking off their masks more. Now it's going to move into Aries. Well, Aries rules the head. Now I'm thinking, will people lose their heads? And yes, quite likely, this is what leads to war. So people losing their heads. And of course, whether it's between countries or individuals, people really losing it. So this is something to be mindful of. So there's going to be an increase of Mars type themes and a decrease of Venus type themes with Ketu and Libra. So what I've thought about that is maybe like smaller social gatherings, maybe things like that, maybe undetectable wearable tech, and maybe even passports that we have to wear. Ketu reduces things. So if Libra is definitely being reduced this year in many ways because Saturn is still aspecting and Ketu is moving in. So we have to think about new ways of socializing, basically. We have to be innovative and all of that to move things forward. So big themes there, I know. Again, if you have questions, if you're here live, please feel free to ask. Next big theme happening at the same time in April is Jupiter and Neptune come together at the very last degree of Aquarius, the water bearer, and then subsequently move into Pisces mid-April. This is a huge flood, like massive. Like I'm looking at like a really massive, like beyond what we've seen in recent history. And maybe even a mass flood and movement of people because of it. And also a flood in terms of a flood of emotion, a release, a surrender, a release of all the trauma and burden that's been held over the last 2 years, a reconnection, a spiritual connection more so. But also, of course, we could see with Neptune, people tuning out completely, whether drug-induced or alcohol or VR, and going off into a kind of tech world and not wanting to live in this real world and going off into some virtual reality. These are all possibilities of Jupiter and Neptune in Pisces in this modern era. Venus conjuncts Neptune and Jupiter in April. That's a party, if ever there was one. Jupiter exalted Venus exalted, Jupiter and Neptune in Pisces. I mean, that's a party for sure. That's complete hedonism, perhaps. Mars then is a bit more complicated, especially conjunct Neptune in May, and then later on at the end of May with Jupiter is a bit more beneficial. Mars-Jupiter combinations are certainly more fortunate, like taking action that's more fortunate. Whereas Mars-Neptune is like, well, how can you take action when you don't even know where you're aiming? It's like swimming around the sea and you're trying to get somewhere, but there's nowhere to get to. That's Mars and Neptune in Pisces. It's like I have this, all this energy, but it's like, where am I going? That's Mars and Neptune. Somebody did ask, patron asked, what is Mars joining Neptune and Jupiter like? That's exactly what it's like. It's like all of this energy and this hope and optimism, and it's like, yay, and it's like, ugh, where am I going exactly? What am I doing again? So again, it's a bit like when you combine this with the release of things, it's a bit like, I think, people feeling freed from their prison. And it's, well, I've never been in prison, but I imagine it's like that. You're leaving prison and it's like, great, but like, oh, now what? Like, where do I go? Who's going to pick me up? These kinds of things. This is literally what it could feel like in April. Yeah, okay, you've been locked up for the last 2 years. So what are you going to do now? You're free, and really not knowing what you're going to do. And maybe not having even asked important questions about what you should be doing in your life. So maybe there's a period of kind of having to kind of float around a bit and being a bit aimless for a while. And it's like, what do I want to do with my life? Those kinds of questions will be important. Okay, so Jupiter and Neptune alone, though, is confusing for sure. Lots of good sides to it in terms of feeling connected again. But of course, there's always the other sides of these things. So feeling disconnected, maybe like the internet does, it connects us supposedly and disconnects us. Hope and delusion, though, you could also be completely deluded, like tuning out. Endings and release, empathy and apathy. Apathy is certainly something that can be expressed in Pisces. escape through drugs or any other kind of escapism, VR, virtual reality, parties, hedonism, space tourism is likely to really take off again this year, pardon the pun. Hyperinflation, though, this is not one of the best expressions, and that's already starting to happen. But of course, Jupiter has already moved in with Neptune in Aquarius anyway, so you can see how this is going to really get out of hand. So hyperinflation, paranoia and propaganda. And I use the example in the article I wrote about Jupiter and Neptune, if you want to go to the website and read it. And this example of the chapati movement, which is so bizarre. I mean, it's just still bizarre. It's like if you're trying to find stuff online about it, it's still like so weird. I just don't know what was happening. Basically, under British rule, Indians were, this is the key, there's a few key things about this. And basically why I'm bringing up this is because they're doing the same thing now as they did in 1857. Jupiter and Neptune are coming together in Aquarius and then moving into Pisces. Same thing that happened back then. So obviously as astrologers, you're always looking back to see repeating patterns, and this is one. But then you also then have to place it in a modern context. And how is this going to play out in modern context? And of course, my instant thought was, okay, it's tech. There's going to be some sort of movement, underground movement, or some messaging getting out there in tech world where it's going to be very confusing. But basically the chapati movement, literally chapatis were distributed around India with apparently with messages in them. But I mean, that's debatable whether they had messages in them. But each village that received these chapatis were told to make 5 more for every one they received. And so it spread literally throughout India under British rule. And the British, of course, were paranoid. This is the whole thing about Neptune and Jupiter and Pisces. They got really paranoid about what was going on. Are they sending messages? What's going on? What are they trying to do? You know, so this kind of like this sense of hope. That's the other key thing about Jupiter and Pisces. They had this sense of hope and this movement. And this is also, and now place it in a modern context. What would we hope for now? If you're thinking about yourself as an Indian under British rule, wanting to get a message out, where are you now? You're obviously under the thumb of some system, right? Naming no names, some restriction, and that you want to, there's this movement going to start happening. Now, I don't know exactly what that looks like, but there is going to be a movement. Okay, so the last big thing that's happening this year is that Mars is going retrograde at the end of the year. I mean, Mars is doing a lot this year, but one of the things it's doing is retrograde. It's in Gemini retrograde from October 30th to the middle of November, and then it goes back into Taurus, November 13th to January 12th next year. So it's an interesting end to the year, and even more interesting, the fact that Rahu's in Aries and aspecting it. So Mars is going to be really behaving really unusually at the end of the year. I'll go through this sign by sign, how this affects all the signs, all of these transits, of course. But in terms of world affairs, I mean, this is just not look good in terms of what's going on in the world. Certainly in terms of, you know, wars and things like that, fighting, and Venus will oppose it at some point as well. At this period, the Chinese Communist Party will hold its 20th National Party Congress. And, you know, Jinping will, quote unquote, be re-elected. And they're going to really reinstate their power and reinstate their mission, like their mission statement and the communist mission statement. But also in the US, there's going to be midterms. And I'll show you that chart. It's really interesting. So the US midterm elections, November 8th. That's all I need to say about that. It's really weird. I'll just give you a simple chart here for it. Mars retrograde, of course, at the edge of the signs here. Venus, sun debilitated, so Mercury here conjunct the sun in this period, and Ketu. And Rahu, Moon, Uranus all conjunct with very tight orbs here. So midterm elections and Jupiter retrograde and all that, midterm elections are a doozy. Basically, I'll say that for the Americans here. They're a doozy. There's going to be some really interesting things coming out of America in November. I'll go into, because I've made predictions about Biden before, and I'm going to continue to make that. So I'm going to say that he's not going to be able to do his job. Either he has to step back or step down, back or down. Either he can't do his job because of, for whatever reason, he can't do it, or he can't do his job because of these midterm elections. Either way. Anyway, we can get into that another time if you have any questions. Now, let's go through the month by month. new and full moons in particular, and then highlight the eclipses. So of course, we've been through this already. I'm recording this on January 23rd. And we've already had the new moon. We've already had a full moon. So this is all history now. But basically, the year started off with a bit of a bang. It's not the easiest start to the year. The new moon in Purvashada, literally, a lot of astrologers translate this as declarations of war. You know, we're in this kind of warlike phase now. When you have a new moon in a particular lunar mansion, it highlights that theme for the whole month until the next new moon, and the next new moon in February 1st. So Mars and Ketu started the year, and Mars then triggered this really uncertain Kālsarpa Yoga. Venus and Mercury retrograde, complicating things. Venus makes things not very, you know, Mercury doesn't make things very clear, but then Venus, you know, isn't very accommodating when it's retrograde, or as accommodating. And Venus and Mars are now together. So basically they are war type situations, but I don't even think it's really as much as it will be in the summer. So that's January. That's kind of, we're past that now already. So let's move on to February. So the next new moon would be February 1st in Śravana. This is in Capricorn. So at that stage, or just after, Mercury will station direct, and Venus will have just station direct. So at least things in February can start to move forward, and actually all the planets are moving forward from February to April. So February, March, April, everything feels like it's moving forward. Now, it might be moving forward in a direction you don't want it to, but everything at least is moving forward. Mars is exalted at the end of February, and it's with Saturn, of course, and in March and April especially, that's heating up. And the Kālsarpa Yoga continues. But this especially, Mars and Venus, same degree, that's really heated, 11th of February to the 12th of March. Now, as they move into Capricorn, as they do this, you know, it's really be mindful of this area of your chart that you're not getting overheated there in your passions, because this could easily spill out into all kinds of, you know, issues in relationship especially. But you see, Mars and Venus, even when they're in a birth chart, you know, the issue here is not being accommodating enough, not compromising enough. When Mars always overcomes Venus, really, because Venus is just, you know, nice. Mars is not, and Mars is so powerful. Mars is exalted. It's in Sagittarius, where it's really powerful, then it goes into Capricorn, exalted. So Venus is hampered, really hammered even. So just be really mindful of your relations right now, especially for Aries and Scorpio ascendants, or moon signs, but really be mindful of how you're relating to everybody, and especially your partner. Don't let the passions get out of hand, and don't let your belief systems, you know, don't hammer your belief systems over someone's head. You know what I mean? Don't shove your belief systems down someone's throat, as it were. That's Mars and Sagittarius especially. So that's February. It's like February, well, Valentine's Day, they're exactly together. Venus and Mars are exactly at the same degree Valentine's Day. That's heated, right? So again, channel it in a more positive way if you can. Be passionate, yes, but try and contain it and express it in a more loving way. So March then. Now, February and March are interesting because all of the planets, like I said, are on one side of the node. So this Kālsarpa Yoga continues, but they actually gather in 2 and 3 signs. By the end of March, they're in only just 2 signs here. If you see this new moon. Now, we're not counting Uranus. Traditionally, that wasn't looked at, the outer planets. All planets in 2 signs with this Kālsarpa Yoga. This is quite intense. You know, this is called a yoga. Yoga. This is very intense. It's generally not seen as a good thing when planets cluster together like that. They're vying for space and they don't have space, just as you would if you were all crammed into a container together. People get tetchy. And the issue with that, of course, is when you have it in a birth chart. So for that answer to that question that someone asked earlier, what's it like when someone has this in their birth chart? Well, you know, when they have a transit, they have a transit on everything going on here. When Saturn transits to Capricorn, it's going over every planet here. In Aquarius, the same. And then the nodes are just exaggerating this. So it really intensifies everything. So it's generally not seen as a positive thing to have planets gather like this. It creates a lot of fighting, in other words. So it's just this war-like situation is going on right through the beginning of the year. Now, the other thing I mentioned here is that Rahu aspects all of these planets in Capricorn. And then the other thing that happens in March is that Ketu transits the upcoming eclipse degree. So it's kind of triggering things in a way already by March, if it's not already triggered, that is. Now, April is the kind of big month because it's when we have the new moon and it's a new year. It's the new year in terms of the new moon in Pisces, but also then the sun moves into Aries mid-month. And for those that are watching that follow the tropical, of course, you know that we use a different zodiac, or we use the same zodiac, but we subtract 24 degrees. So by mid-April, we have sun moving into Aries. So the new moon in Revati at the very end of Pisces is the Lunar New Year on April 1st, April Fool's Day. Oh, and that's just a side note. So let me show you it. So this is the chart. Now, this is for Ireland, where I am. So it's not going to be the same here for everyone. For the US, it's Sagittarius rising. For Ireland, it's Pisces. For UK, it's Aries. For Russia, it's Gemini. That's a bit tense because you've got Mars-Saturn now in the 8th. But for China, it's Cancer. Now, Russia and China, definitely, you can see it heating up already. We know that that's happening. But I almost think that, yeah, Russia is definitely, there's something going on there and the potential is there, imminent. But I do think China later on in the year is going to create some issues there in terms of attacks. I mean, look, you've got Cancer rising, you've got then Mars and Saturn in the 7th house with Pluto. And Mars and Saturn are within 2 degrees. This is just, and it's just a case of time then. It's just a case of timing this getting triggered. Mercury is usually with the sun and moon on the new moon, so it's not unusual, but it's not cancelled by anything here. So Mercury in Pisces is a bit lost at sea in this case, and there's no cancellation here. Jupiter and Venus are not cancelling. So yeah, it's quite an intense chart. It is an intense year. It's this, therefore, the whole year has this energy of Kālsarpa Yoga, Mars-Saturn conjunction. Yes, it has a Jupiter, Venus, Neptune in here, which, you know, at least shows that, you know, humanity is, you know, or there is this sense of looking at something differently. Let's hope for something else. But we have to hope for something else when what's happening is just really quite intense and extreme. But there are just definitely some more positive things going on here, more hopeful things along with these things. And even these things, Mars and Saturn, they're so powerful that I think, well, maybe in the context of a global pandemic, that actually this is a way of fighting our way out of this and overcoming this issue. And then maybe in that case, it's actually a positive thing. It's like a double negative in a way. So that's the new moon in April. I'll talk more about what it means in terms of the new moon and the Lunar New Year and all that in a minute. So like I said, Rahu Ketu then in April move signs, Aries, Libra. That's the big shift. By the end of April, Mercury breaks this Kālsarpa Yoga finally on the 24th. Mars started it, remember, in the beginning of the year, and that started, you know, starts the year off with really quite intense energy. But Mercury, you know, we might say Mercury breaking it is about, you know, thinking more practically about things and how are we going to move forward. How, again, let's talk this out kind of thing. Let's negotiate. So we have a full moon on the 16th, and then we have a second new moon. That's why you can see more here. There's a second new moon in April on the 30th. That's this one here in Aries. And this one is a partial eclipse, a partial solar eclipse. The eclipses this year are partial solar, both of them, and both lunar eclipses are total. So let's just look at the chart for the UK just so you can see that. This is the new moon, Lunar New Year on the 1st of April. So it places now Mars and Saturn and Pluto in the 10th house. Now, I've already made predictions about Boris Johnson like being under threat this whole time. I'm not sure about him leaving though, to be honest, but I do think that there's a constant threat here. And definitely, I would say generally, yeah, there is a threat in the world in terms of governments having to change and having a lot of opposition to current leaders. So you can see it happening all over the world that people are really threatened with their leadership. But in the UK, you can see that in particular with changes. So that's UK. China, this is the one I mentioned. This is the new lunar year, April 1st for China, and then it places these in the 7th. Now, by the way, anyone with Cancer prominent, You don't have to have it rising. Whatever's going on in Cancer for you, there's a lot of opposition going on for you. Cancer rising, Cancer moon, any planets or any areas of your life, look at Cancer. What is going on in Cancer? Because it's receiving all of these aspects, all of the planets gathering in Capricorn. So there's a lot of opposition. So you might have to deal with some things with your partner in relations in general in this year. I'll talk about the signs one by one anyway in a minute, so we can go through that. This is the year, the Shubha. Shubha literally means auspicious, and it's the 36th Jovian year, Jupiter year, and it's a cycle of Jupiter and Saturn and how they intermingle. And there are 5-year cycles, so it's like Jupiter takes 12 years to go around, and these 5-year cycles makes up 60 years. So that's positive, you know, in one way. It is definitely more positive than the last few years. And it's the end of, like I said, it's the end of a 5-year cycle, which began in 2017. So that shows that there is something moving on, something shifting this year. This is the eclipse at the end of April, 30th of April, and the partial, this is the first eclipse. So we have the partial solar eclipse. So it's not going to be seen very much, but it's still an eclipse. I'll highlight these degrees as well at the end here. But just to note here, on the 30th of April, 16 degrees of Aries. If you have any planets, if you're born anywhere near the 30th of April, that's an important one for you. Then we have May. We have the next eclipse, because obviously we have eclipse follows 2 weeks after. So this is a total eclipse, a total lunar eclipse on and in Scorpio, the 1st degree of Scorpio. Mercury retrograde opposite. This is quite, see how you can start counting now how many times I use the word intense. I'm really conscious of not using it, but I've used it once now. I'm going to write down every time I use it. But this is intense. There's no doubt about it. A full moon in Scorpio, totally eclipsed on the 16th of May, is an intense day. So that's definitely one to mark and red mark in your diary as maybe a time to slow down and maybe not react too strongly to this. And then at the end of May, 30th of May, we have a new moon. This is the start of the new lunar cycle in Rohini in Taurus. So that's obviously Taurus. It's a moon exalted. It's a much better situation after that. After that intense full moon. But there is something very nice, as it happens every year, on the 3rd of May. And this is definitely something to mark in your calendar as like with a nice flowery symbol or a heart symbol. And this is when the sun, moon are exalted, and this year also Venus exalted with Jupiter in Pisces. There's a lot of strengths in this period. Now this is called, on the 3rd of May, Akshaya Tritiya means undiminished third lunar day. Tritiya is the third lunar day. So the undiminishing third lunar day. This is seen as a very auspicious day, and it's said to cancel out all other negative aspects. So 3rd of May would be a good day if you want to start some auspicious activity. I mentioned here that all malefics are aspecting Aries because it's something to note that this is ongoing now for this whole summer period. Saturn is aspecting, Rahu is there, Mars will move in here, Ketu is opposite. Whatever you've got going on in Aries is going to feel the heat and the need to drive and push forward. And this is why I feel like war type situations are really, we're on the brink now because of Aries being really, really pushing it. And you know, individually, of course, you can manage that because it's just about your personal freedoms. But when you put personal freedoms into groups of people, you get protests on the streets and violent protests at that. And then when you put it into nations, it becomes war. So these are why we're having warlike situations. Anyway, I won't dwell on that. This is the lunar eclipse on the 16th, 1st degree of Scorpio. This is quite intense. Whether you can see it or not. If you can see it, of course, yeah, it might be more intense, but it doesn't matter. If it's more so if you've got any planets at 1 degree Scorpio or near there, that's when it's going to be really intense. Next month, June. Now things are really heating up at this point into the summer. So we're really having these kind of warlike situations going on. The full moon in Dhaniṣṭhā, another full moon in Scorpio. Like we haven't had enough. We've got a second one. So we have one in full moon in Scorpio in May, and then we have a full moon in Scorpio in June, because it's at the 1st degree in May, and it's an eclipse, and then it's at the very last degree in June. So this is intense. I got to mark it again. I've said it twice now. So then the new moon is in Ardra, which is again intense. Mars enters Aries, intense. Rahu and Uranus in Aries, intense, 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 intense. Everything is leading up to this kind of summer period where it's really full on. Now, this can be intensely good, by the way, for you personally. This is really about breaking some boundary. Aries is all about breaking through something, going for something you want and doing it regardless of the rules. But by the end of July, when Saturn moves back into Capricorn and squares. Now, at this time, of course, Saturn is aspecting here, so there's some containment for it at least. But when Saturn moves back here and is not containing it, all it's doing is conflicting with it, i.e. the ongoing theme of personal freedoms in conflict with universal needs. The ongoing theme of what I want to do is, and what I'm told to do is. That's going to blow up like you haven't seen in the last 2 years, actually. It's going to be even more intense than 2020 or 2021. Sorry to say, but if you're on board with it now, you can channel it. You can get on board with it. Do something like, if you're feeling frustrated with the restrictions at the end of July, you know, yeah, just find a way, find an outlet if there's any restrictions. Now, it might not be restrictions in terms of the COVID thing. It might be restrictions in terms of, you know, some other thing. So let's not rule that out. But it seems like there are definitely this sense by July more so. There's this sense of having to go back to some sort of restriction or going back to the drawing board as well. Things didn't work out that way. Oh, maybe even, for example, the most obvious example. I want my freedom. I don't want to have to go into the office every single day. That's a big thing right now. Let's try this hybrid working thing. Okay, it didn't work. Let's go back to the drawing board. So it might be like that, and people just might get really frustrated because Aries and Capricorn really are work related in very many ways. Aries is very productive, Capricorn also. So it's like, this doesn't work anymore. Then let's try going back to the drawing board and let's try this now. And so it just might feel a bit frustrated in the summer. So this is July, full moon here in the very end of Sagittarius, and then the new moon is in Pushya in Cancer. Saturn at that point, by the end of July, is moved back into Capricorn, squaring now Mars, Rahu, Uranus, and that is leading up to this massive conjunction on the 1st of August. This I haven't seen in all my years of doing astrology, this intense, to be quite honest with you. This is major. I don't want to like overblow things, but like, you know, I feel like I'm given free rein after 2020, to be honest with you. I was holding back up until then, but it's like, okay, I don't feel like I need to anymore. This is full on. August 1st, Mars, Uranus, Rahu, all at the exact same degree, 24 degrees of Aries, squaring Saturn. You know, this is full on. And so the full moon, despite it being a full moon in, the new moon in Cancer, opposes the Saturn Pluto and squares Mars. So Mars is aspecting this moon. I'll show you here in a bigger way. Mars aspects this moon opposite Saturn. You know, the one good thing to say about all of this, of course, in case you hadn't noticed here, is that we have been dealing a lot with Cancerian and Pisces themes here, and they have been dealing more than anyone with issues. And that means care, self-care, and care in general. Pisces are literally hospitals. Cancer is about self-care and being at home and feeling safe at home. And these two signs have been really hammered, really, in the last 2 years because of Saturn and Pluto. But Jupiter is now moving into Pisces and aspecting Cancer from mid-April. So despite these intense transits right now, especially in July, there is some sense of things are easing up for the health sector. Things are easing up for a sense of self-care as well, and our own sense of care for ourselves and feeling cared for and safe generally. So that's what I'd say about that. So we have to combine that now with these really heated sort of warlike situations and fighting in general in our personal lives. And that actually, why would we fight about anything anyway, only for it's important to us and we don't feel safe. So it's about making us feel safe, you know, and something maybe is worth fighting for. Let's say that way. So that's July. August, the full moon Dhaniṣṭhā in Capricorn with Saturn Pluto here. You know, Mars has now moved into Taurus. That's another indication here. It'll move back into Taurus later on in the year. It's going to stay so long in Taurus. when I talk about each sign, this will make more sense for each sign. And then the new moon on 27th is in Magha. It's in Leo here. You can see the sun and moon coming together. Mars still aspects, Rahu also aspects, you know. But anyway, you're always going to have a mixed bag each month. Saturn, Mars, and the nodes impact Libra now. Libra is getting really impacted at this point, and from the end of July, really, because you have Saturn aspecting, Rahu opposite, and Ketu and Mars opposite up until this point here. So Libra and whatever Libra represents generally, which is equality and law and things like that, but also social life, socializing. There's some issues here for sure. Okay, so next month we have September. I know I'm plowing through these, but again, if you have questions, feel free, you know, at the end, if you've marked down any notes. Full moon in Purva Bhadrapada. This is on the 10th of September here in Aquarius. I won't go through these in too much detail. New moon in Uttara Phalguni in Virgo opposite. Mercury retrograde in Virgo at the time as well in September. Not unusual in September, and Mercury goes into Virgo usually at that time of year, and it's a great time of year to start scheduling and start planning and all these things. Uranus is retrograde in Aries also. Moving on to October, getting into eclipses again, October, November. So full moon in Pisces on the 9th of October. The new moon then is in Libra on the 25th, and it's a partial solar eclipse. It's not only a partial solar eclipse, the sun is seen as at its weakest at this time. So this is Diwali in India. This is the festival of lights, the Day of the Dead, the darkest night, all of that. So it's also an eclipse. So that's, sorry to say, intense. That's quite intense in terms of the darkness at this period. And heading into the winter with this kind of eclipse in Libra, I think that, again, in relation to social life, that could be a bit depressing in October. Venus is in Virgo in October as well, up until, you know, this new moon. It then moves into Libra, which is at least some saving grace and actually cancels this, or not cancel, mitigates the sun in Libra, its weakness. So there is something to at least enjoy here. Saturn squares Uranus in October as well. That's another big thing, almost exactly. So 24 degrees Saturn, 23 degrees Uranus. So that theme is going on all year, but it's kind of reaching a height into the autumn, winter. And of course, no two guesses for what that means. That means further restrictions, means that really we've lost all patience for this now at this point, and we don't want to put any more restrictions, and we're not going to want to, basically. And then Mars stations retrograde by the end of October, which I'll go into next month as well. That's complicated. It starts in a Gemini, and then in November goes back to Taurus until the new year. And Mars retrograde is, you know, Mars, well, generally it doesn't like to retrograde anyway, because it wants to move forward with things. And energy turned in on itself and anger turned in on itself is never a healthy thing. But in Taurus, where it's a more accommodating sign anyway, and you put Mars in Taurus, and it's like, it's too accommodating for the energy of Mars, which wants to kind of bulldoze ahead. Adding a Mars retrograde in Taurus just kind of leads to a lot of frustration. Adding that now to the fact that Saturn and Uranus are squaring each other, and all of this kind of hindrance on Libra and social life, you can imagine that people are really frustrated at this point into November, December. So unfortunately, the year ends with a lot of bitterness, I think. So definitely make the most of the summer, because it's a wild one. Okay, so the partial eclipse, the partial solar eclipse, is on the 25th in Libra. Like I said, this is, you know, the Day of the Dead, or, you know, this the Festival of Lights in India, Diwali, the dark night. So, you know, we need to be mindful of that. That's the 25th of October, if you want to mark it in your diaries. It's a partial eclipse, but no less intense because of it, I don't think, because of its position. And then in November, we have then, of course, the total lunar eclipse 2 weeks after that eclipse on the 8th of November. And this is in Aries. Now, Again, squaring Saturn here, and it's with Rahu, of course, and Uranus, very closely conjunct Uranus. It's a full moon. It's totally eclipsed. It's, in Aries. Mars is retrograde in Gemini at the time. Intense. I can't think of any other words. I'm sorry. It's intense. Okay. So just mark these in your diary. The full moon, total lunar eclipse on the 8th of November. Again, that could be intensely good. I don't see intense always as a bad word. It depends in what context you use it. Mars retrograde in Taurus, Jupiter moves direct at least. The new moon then is in Scorpio. So you can see here the moon and sun come together in Scorpio. Mars opposite Mercury and Venus retrograde. The end of the year is just it's very tricky. It's really tricky. Whatever about the complexities of the whole year up until this point, the end of the year is like, everything was going swell and we're moving forward and everything. We got our freedom. And then it's like, what? Wait a minute. Oh, maybe that didn't work. Or I can't do this hybrid working thing or whatever. It's like trying to find ways out, and it's kind of like getting stuck. We're getting stuck at the end of the year. The total lunar eclipse on the 8th of November, this is it in Aries. So it'll be seen by quite a lot of the world anyway. And then finally December. So December, we have a full moon in Rohini in Taurus with Mars. Look at that, exactly conjunct. I won't use the word beginning with I. New moon in Mula in 23rd of December, just before Christmas, is a new moon. Mars retrograde conjunct the full moon, I mentioned that. Neptune direct, but look at this new moon then right before Christmas in Mula. Okay, so just to recap on the eclipse degrees, because these are important times to be mindful of, generally on the day, but also if your birthday is around these dates, or if you have planets at these degrees. So the first eclipse on the 30th of April, 16 degrees of Aries. May 16th, then we have on the first degree of Scorpio, 25th of October, 7 degrees of Libra, and then the 8th of November, 21 degrees Aries. So definitely, if you know you have any planets there, any sensitive degrees, definitely time to be mindful. So now let's get into the signs. So, before I get into that, I want to say something about this because, of course, when you read forecasts, you're generally, you're reading general forecasts, and how do you apply it to your own chart? I would say initially start with your rising sign, because if you can add your moon sign too, that's great. But there are other indications for the moon sign, and for example, transits of planets that would maybe do well from the rising sign that maybe wouldn't be so well from the moon sign, and vice versa. So there's some differences between the rising and moon sign in a way, but at the same time, I would really encourage you to look at both rising and moon sign. And rising sign is your physical environment, what's going on, what's actually happening. So that's why it's good to start there, because you can literally see it happening. The moon sign, though, is more about how you feel, maybe about what's happening, or maybe about what you would like to make happen. But whether you can make it happen or not is another matter. And that's why the moon doesn't always show definitive results, whereas the rising sign will. And that's why you just keep hearing astrologers talk about rising sign all the time. But the moon is important. And of course, the cycles, the planetary cycles I mentioned at the beginning are so important, and they're calculated from the moon, that it would be really good for you if you could really know what planetary cycle you're in, more than these transits. To know that you're in a Mars cycle. Now look at Mars, what's it doing, and really focus on Mars for the year. If you're in Mars for the year, or Jupiter or Saturn or whatever it is, because that's more important. But it's worked out from your moon. So you could look at then from the moon, these transits. So for example, Saturn does well in the 3rd, 6th, and 11th from the moon. Jupiter does well in the 2nd from the moon. Maybe not so much actually, transiting the moon as is in the 2nd from the moon. So there's these kind of different things with the moon. But anyway, think about whatever you have in Aries, I would say, not just the rising or moon. You might have anything here in Aries. So the thing I said about Mars, of course, starts off really strong. So Aries, this is a strong year for you, but there's definitely complexities going on, Aries. You've got a lot to get through, a lot of kind of obstacles to overcome, and definitely you have the energy to overcome them. Absolutely. You're starting off in Scorpio, then Sagittarius, then exalted in Capricorn, and then you're ending up in Aries at one point. Yes, you're ending the year on a really complicated place where you're retrograding from Gemini to Taurus, but most of the year is really strong. It's just that you have to use that strength in productive ways and not destructive ways. So, you know, in Aries, June 26th to August 10th, really strong, conjunct Saturn, exalted, February 26th to April 7th, exalted, really strong. All of these are really strong transits. It's just this end of the year is really complicated for you, Aries. And because it's doing it in Venus's sign, you know, in Taurus, most of the time, it's really complex. So just be mindful of your energy, that you're using your willpower and energy to really get something done, and try not to overdo things, and try to manage your energy and focus your energy. The positive things here, of course, is that Jupiter is in your 11th at the moment. It'll then move into your 12th by mid-April until the following April, 2023. And these are very much about your long-term goals and what you need to surrender, and maybe even the money you need to spend on getting what you want long-term. And while Saturn also moves from the 10th into the 11th, and really Saturn does very well in the 11th, more than the 10th, especially if it's from your moon in Aries, but rising sign also. Saturn in the 11th really gets you to focus on your long-term plans. But there's just a hint. Remember, Saturn in Aquarius is just the summer months, and it won't return here until January 2023. The nodes, of course, create complexities wherever they go. But for you, Aries, this is probably more complex than most other signs because it's moving into your sign. So Rahu will move into your first sign, Ketu into your 7th. So relationships are key this year, from April especially. Up until now, the last year, it's been about finances, 2nd, 8th, but then it's about relationships, 1, 7. And of course, be mindful of how you're interacting with everybody, not just your partner or partners, any other, with Ketu in the 7th and Rahu in your sign Aries, because it's really going to exaggerate you. It could really promote you, but promote you at the cost of someone else. So that's something to be mindful of, Aries. Taurus begins complicated, whereas Mars signs end really complicated with the retrograde. Taurus and Libra, Venus's signs, begin really complicated in the year. So Venus is retrograde until the end of January, and in your 8th sign, Taurus. So this is quite complex, but with it being retrograde. So there's a lot of issues to work out in terms of joint finances and, you know, intimacy issues and all of these things, and, you know, changes that are beyond your control and things that are just generally outside of your control. Then it's combust, has been combust. January 4th to 14th, that has been, but it's again combust in September until the end of November. That's just something to be mindful of every year, because it combusts every year. Nothing new there. Some astrologers say that it actually doesn't combust in direct motion, so that September to November would not be considered as combust, only when retrograde, so just in January. Venus is now visible again in the morning sky, thankfully. So at least we can see Venus again. We can start to appreciate things again. Yes, it's still retrograde till January 29th, and things aren't working out smoothly for us right now, but at least we can see something to appreciate. So by February, it really starts to heat up because it's conjunct Mars. And for you, Taurus, you know, it starts in your 8th and then goes into your 9th. This is the time to be really mindful of, you know, of course, dealing with any other, because it's all about you and the other, Venus and Mars, you and the other. So when you're getting into any discussions about people's beliefs, make sure you're just mindful of this. And so, you know, obviously it might be that the other person is really hammering their point home, and you might feel kind of trodden on because of that, because Taurus, you're quite, you know, amiable and compromising. So this could be quite challenging in February. Now, Venus is exalted in your 11th, which is always good. It's in Pisces, end of April to the end of May. So this is the sweet spot in the year. You know, May, I said anyway, was a sweet spot. It generally is anyway. May is generally the sweet spot in any given year. It's definitely a sweet spot in this year because we have overcome so much at this stage. Jupiter has moved into Pisces, then Venus moves into Pisces, exalted. There's so much to appreciate and love. And it's like, you know, when you've been freed and then you get together with people you haven't seen in so long, and it's like this massive gathering, and it's like, oh my God, it's just overwhelming. This could be overwhelming for you, especially Taurus, because it's in your 11th sign. So yeah, enjoy it. but try not to overdo it, I would say, either. There could be an indulgence going on here for sure. So then it's in your first sign, which is always good as well. End of June to the middle of July, Venus and Taurus is always a sweet spot in the year as well. But at this stage, things are starting to really heat up in other ways that, yeah, we can enjoy these things, the simple things in life, but there are other complexities. Now, what's really complex for you also, and it starts and ends complex in a way for you, Taurus, because Venus is retrograde at the beginning of the year, and then Mars goes back into your sign retrograde at the end of the year, November, December. So you obviously, Taurus, have partner issues to deal with this year. You're having to deal with some hidden dynamics maybe in your relationships in general, but also if you are in a relationship, of course, or a recent relationship, maybe you're finding out some things now and you're having to go back over these issues, or maybe you're going back over really past issues, like long time ago issues. And even with a new partner, they might bring it up for you. Jupiter and Neptune in your 10th and 11th. So Jupiter in the 11th is really well placed. If it's your moon sign, especially, but rising sign too, Jupiter really does well in the 11th. So Jupiter and Neptune go from your 10th to your 11th. So this is definitely a lot of gains available here in the year from April, Taurus. Saturn and Pluto in your 9th, and then Saturn in your 10th. So of course, Saturn and Pluto in the 9th is not so easy. It's challenging you in terms of long distance travel and all of that, as we all are. But Saturn in the 10th is better, and getting you to work hard at something. And like we're all going to be doing in the summer, innovating, whatever we're doing. The nodes then move from the intensity of the 1st and 7th as you're dealing with all of these relationship issues. You still have them to deal with this year for sure, but then the nodes move into a better position really in a way in the 12th and 6th. So the North node in the 12th, South node in the 6th. So it's like overcoming some challenges here and being able to do that as well. And maybe wanting to go on retreat after, dealing with all of these personal issues, so it might be a good time to go on retreat this year. Gemini, this is a complicated time for you, Gemini, because of the cluster of planets in Capricorn. It's your 8th sign, so that's a bit complicated. But let me talk about Mercury retrograde first, because as it does it every year, Gemini, you're always aware of this. In your 8th, in January, February, as it is now, it's not always just the minor hiccups. Sometimes it's just the plans that you cannot move ahead with because things aren't working out. Then it retrogrades in your 12th in May, June. And also that might be things out of sight. Now it could be out of sight, out of mind, but it could be out of sight, like I can't see the way forward here as well. And then in September, October in your 4th in home. So always be mindful of these retrogrades for everybody, but I'm just flagging it here for Gemini especially. Mars retrograde in your sign, especially end of October, middle of November. That's something to flag. Jupiter and Neptune in your 9th, which is very positive. Jupiter aspecting your sign in your 9th until November or middle of April. And then in your 10th, so career, maybe there's some opportunity there in career from the middle of April onwards. This is really complicated. Saturn, Pluto in your 8th, with all of the other planets gathered here now, with Mercury retrograde and all of that. For Gemini, this is like a lot of things that are just outside of your control, that you cannot control, that might be quite fear-inducing. Because, when we're fearful, of course, we want to just have some sort of sense of certainty. And when we can't have that, we'll latch on to anything. So this is quite challenging. But the good news is that Saturn moves on from your 8th and moves into your 9th. Briefly in the summer. It does have to move back with Pluto in the 8th for the rest of the year, of course, but that's, again, if you've had 2 years of it already, Gemini, so I'm sure you're used to it at this stage, but it is the last year of it. And then the nodes move from your 12th and 6th, which is this need wanting to kind of trip out, maybe tune out of all that's going on in the world and all the things that you cannot change. And then moving into your 11th and 5th. So you're really focusing on wanting to connect with groups again. And this is more positive. Rahu in the 11th especially, a very good position for Rahu. So maybe looking at not just groups and friends and reconnecting to people and your network. Gemini, you love networks anyway. But also maybe reconnecting to your bigger dreams. Cancer, this is most definitely a complicated year, Cancer. Now, you can handle this, you can take it on board and you can deal with the issues, but there are issues coming up here, and especially leading up to April in your relationships, because all of these planets are gathered in your 7th house. the Mercury retrograde, the Saturn Pluto, the Mars coming in March, April. This is a time where it's about getting over issues, not bulldozing your way through and destroying someone. And you wouldn't do that anyway, Cancer, because you're so caring, but at the same time, you're having to deal with it in your partner and any other. So in terms of getting over things, I think it would be better spent in overcoming personal challenges and maybe with the help of someone else. That's maybe one better expression of this. Mars-Saturn conjunct in your 7th, especially flag this period on the 5th of April in your 7th house of relationships, Cancer. Now, remember I said everyone has all of these signs. So whatever Cancer is for you, you're looking at the opposition to that. What is opposing that part of your life, especially leading up to April? What opposition do I have to this part of my life? If you're Cancer rising, of course, it's going to be literally like it feels like a physical opposition, like a physical. If it's your moon sign, there's a lot of emotionals involved in well. So just be mindful of it, that we all have these signs. Jupiter and Neptune are in your 9th. Now, this is a lot more positive. And if it weren't for this, I would have said this would have been a much more challenging year. But Jupiter aspecting your sign, this is really like your saving grace. So this is a lot more beneficial. This just feels better. This feels more expansive. This aspect to your sign is just, again, your saving grace. So that's something to make use of for sure. But it comes after all of this. So hang on in there basically until the middle of April, Cancer, and your relationships will start easing up and you'll feel better in yourself as well. Saturn then moves into your 8th briefly in the summer, remember. So from your 7th into your 8th, at least it moves from your 7th, so it's not full on, but it's in your 8th sign then, so you're having to deal with uncertainties. And it's all relationship issues. It's all sort of, 8th house is very much about the icky parts of relationship where it's like joint resources and things that you really don't have any control over, basically. Then the nodes, Rahu Ketu in your 11th, 5th at the moment. So friends and children and networks and all of that. Complexities for sure, but then by April, it moves into your work and home life. So then you're having to change your work and home life, whether you're working from home or wanting to work somewhere else, whatever it is, the nodes from mid-April are going to create changes in your work life and your home life. So Cancer, be open to that change, I would say, from April. Leo, planets have gathered in your 6th at the moment. So it's really challenging you to step up and improve your life, whatever you've got going on in Leo. If it's rising sign Leo, of course, it's physical things, so it might be health issues, but it's also to do with work routines. Jupiter is in your 7th at the moment, which is more positive generally, and then moves into your 8th. Jupiter in the 8th, though a benefic planet and, you know, the saving grace in many instances, with the 8th, it's about really connecting to something deeper and beyond, you know, partnerships and agreements. And it's about something more intimate and delving deeply as well into the psychology of your connection to other people. You know, that's 8th house. Intimacy in all of that. It's about connecting more deeply, I would say. Saturn and Pluto are in your 6th at the moment, which actually is a good place for Saturn to improve your life, to overcome challenges. But then it moves into your 7th, and you're, whatever you've dreamt up in your relations right now, and whatever rose tinted glasses you had on looking at your partner, looking at any other situation, you're definitely taking them off in the summer. And that's just a hint at next year where you really be looking at this person more objectively. That can be a good thing. But it's also a need to look at how your relationships work or not, and maybe where they need improvement and where you need to work on it and innovate it. Then the nodes are in your 10th and 4th, so it's all about work and home and the complexities that you've been dealing with over the last year here. But then they move into your 9th and 3rd, so this emphasis on 9th, and, you know, looking at 9th and 3rd, I always look at them as that lower and higher mind. The 3rd is the lower and the 9th is the higher. So that could also be your just everyday enjoyments versus more meaningful pursuits. And maybe here now, Rahu in the 9th will gear you towards maybe doing something more meaningful. And maybe that might mean going back to study, maybe self-study, maybe travel, maybe something that just broadens your mind in some way. So that offers more possibility. Like if it was to do with changes that you've had at work recently, for example, maybe now you're having to take up a new course so that you can improve your situation. Okay, Virgo. just as with Gemini, of course, highlighting the Mercury retrogrades. The Mercury retrogrades are always important to highlight because, they impact you very personally, of course, but unlike Gemini, which is a lot more personal and kind of like home life, for Virgo, it's very professional. It's always about professional life. So Mercury retrograde in your 5th initially, January, Feb. This is confusing for you, Virgo, and not really sure how you're going to go forward, whether it's with a partner, a relationship, a new relationship, wanting to meet someone, or your future plans in general, or any children that you have, or followers, whether it's social media or whatever it is. You're not quite sure at the moment because of Mercury retrograde. So that finishes in February. Then in May, June, it's in your 9th sign, and then in September, October in your 1st. So these are the 5th, 9th, and 1st. It's very much about your purpose in life. So finding your purpose this year will be a really important part of Mercury retrogrades for you, Virgo. Jupiter and Neptune going from your 6th to your 7th. So this shows by April an improvement in terms of relationship, a possibility of meeting someone, or just connecting more deeply with people in general. If you are already with someone, that therefore means that maybe that's a good time to actually connect more with your partner. But it could easily mean, especially if you meet someone new, that you have like rose-tinted glasses on from the very beginning, and that you're really not seeing the person, that you're just seeing an illusion. That's Neptune. So that's something to be mindful of. Saturn and Pluto in your 5th initially, then Saturn in your 6th. So Saturn and Pluto in your 5th, again, that's part of the complexity of this Mercury retrograde right now, and you're really not sure about your future plans. Saturn, though, then goes into your 6th in the summer. That's so much better because Saturn in the 6th is a good position, and really gets you to improve your life and work hard at some goal. And then finally, the nodes, Rahu Ketu, are in your 9th and 3rd up until April. Then they move into your 8th and 2nd. More complexity here in terms of joint finances, joint resources, but also joint values. If you were to meet someone this year, for example, or if you're with someone and you want to connect more with them, you're also having to deal with these kind of maybe icky issues in relationship, 8th, 2nd house. So joint finances are just one. It's about intimacy also, and joint values, where you have to come together and decide what's important to both of you. 8th house, of course, also to do with a lot of changes as well that you're going through. When Rahu goes into your 8th house, there's a lot of transformation with Rahu in Aries in your 8th house for you this year, Virgo. A lot of personal transformation. So then Libra starts again complicated for Libra because Venus is retrograde in your 3rd house with Mars until end of January. So, Venus is not about fighting, and yet Venus, Mars are coming together in your 3rd retrograde. Like, this is like warrior type energy, which is just not suitable for Libra generally. And then it's combust as well in January, has been, sorry. And then again, by the end of the year. But this is the key thing here. Venus conjunct Mars in your 3rd and then 4th in February, March. And then joining Saturn and Pluto in Capricorn. A lot of complexities here in your home life, Libra. And they're impacting you very personally and even physically. You might, if that's your rising sign, physically even, because Saturn aspects your sign. Jupiter, thankfully, has been easing up on that and has been aspecting your sign from the 5th house position. And so until April, you have that kind of saving grace. But then after that, Jupiter moves into your 6th. Now, Jupiter in the 6th is ruling the 6th in Pisces. So that's beneficial. So Libra, you can really start to connect more with your everyday life, with your everyday routines that you have to get on with. There's no reason you can't, but there are always, with Libra, struggles with Jupiter, with finding meaning in those things as well, and not finding that it's all a chore, trying to really connect with the work that you do, and that has to be done. Saturn and Pluto in your 4th, and then Saturn in your 5th. Again, it's home life, and beyond that, it's about love, creativity, and self-expression. And what is it going to take for you to do what you want to do? And you're going to really have to think about this long term. This is just a hint, remember, in the summer when Saturn moves into Aquarius. And then, again, because Libra, you're so accommodating, this is really going to force some issue, because Uranus, Rahu, and Mars are all going to come into your 7th house, and July and August, therefore, are really explosive. So the 1st of August is when they exactly conjunct in your 7th house. So that's a red flag in the year for you, Libra, and when you're dealing with anyone. whoever you're dealing with, not just your partner, anyone. So just make sure you're not like sucked into a vortex there, into some sort of power struggle with someone else, because you could easily, because you're so accommodating, Libra, you could easily get sucked into a situation there. So just be mindful there. Rahu Ketu then move from your 8th and 2nd into your 7th and 1st. And this is what's adding to the intensity, where it's full on relationship issues. So Rahu in the 7th really focuses you so much on the other that you could lose yourself in the mix with Ketu in your 1st. You just could get lost in this mix. And like I said, it could be like a vortex in July, August, especially. So just be mindful of yourself, lots of self-care, look after yourself at home, and don't get sucked into too many dramas, other people's dramas especially. Scorpio, Mars, again, starts out strong, as I mentioned, in your 1st, and then goes into Sagittarius, which is strong, but it's then exalted in Capricorn from February 26th to April 7th. So that's all very powerful, except that with all of that energy, if you're not focusing on a task, you are going to feel very frustrated. So focus all your energy, because this is your 3rd house. So really focus all of your energy and willpower on making something happen. And if you don't have a project you're working on or something you're doing, it could really get frustrating for you. So you need to go out and run, or, you know, without overdoing it, of course. And if you are exercising, by the way, or if you're using your hands in any way, be mindful of what you're doing. Just focus on what you're doing. Don't like be mindlessly doing lots of things and dropping things and breaking things and, you know, all these kinds of things. So it's all about, of course, confidence, building confidence, but, you know, you don't build confidence by knocking yourself down. You build your confidence by slowly building yourself up. Think about it like going to the gym. You don't want to build all that muscle in one session. You want to do it over the whole year, right? This is kind of like a year for you, Scorpio, to build that muscle. That's 3rd house. The other complexity is also strength, remember, because Mars is strong in Aries, but it's your 6th sign. So July, August, again, flagging that August 1st period. This is about you overcoming some challenges in your life, weaknesses that you've been really putting off maybe, and changing your routines. Like if you haven't changed your routines by July, August, you will be forced to change them. It will become then an outside event happening that you have to change up your routines. So make sure that you're on board with the changes that you yourself are instigating, whether you're aware of it or not. This is what shadows do. And then again, ending the year in this complexity with Mars retrograde in your 8th and then going back into your 7th. I mean, relationships this year are key, of course, because if you're working so much on yourself and building yourself up and expressing yourself and doing all of this work and overcoming your challenges and finding your strength, you could easily hamper your relationships. So just be very mindful from the end of the year. All relationships, not just with your partner, but any kind of engagement at all. Mars retrograde in your 7th house in Taurus is tricky. So it could lead to kind of frustrations with your partner. So that's something to be mindful of. Jupiter then in your 4th, this is very positive. So this is actually very positive, especially regarding all of the other things I mentioned, because it's really, again, a saving grace for you. Just like Cancer, for Scorpio, this is saving grace this year, and that's Jupiter moving into your 5th, because it aspects your sign. So there's definitely a sense of buoyancy for you this year, Scorpio, a huge sense of buoyancy. And maybe that's also leading to the kind of overdoing it thing and building yourself up or trying to do too much. And then kind of maybe trampling on people and then people feeling like you're just too much. So try and obviously dial that back while really making the most of this and taking advantage of this buoyancy. And then Saturn and Pluto in your 3rd, and then Saturn moving into your 4th, aspecting your sign. So you don't get away with just doing anything. Saturn will remind you to keep within certain boundaries when it aspects your sign in the summer. And of course, issues around, you know, what you want to make happen, but also in your home environment. There obviously is a hint here in the summer of 2022 at changes that are having to be made in your home next year. And then finally, Rahu Ketu, from the intensity of the relationship issues that you've been dealing with, or just generally relating or dealing with outside influences and maybe getting lost in the mix, then they go into a better position, 6th and 12th. This is actually a good position for the nodes for you, Scorpio, because Rahu in the 6th is well placed and Ketu in the 12th is well placed. So it's a good time for overcoming issues, dealing with your weaknesses, your bad habits, cleaning up your act, and having a downtime, having some retreat. Maybe going on a retreat after April would be a good idea. Sagittarius, Jupiter is combust February, March. It's all good for us all to know that, of course, but for you Sagittarius in particular, especially a rising sign. And then it joins Neptune in April, moving from your third to your fourth. So there's a obviously transition phase here from third to fourth and combustion into this more energetic April period, and into your home and feeling like you're coming home. Now, whether that's figurative or literal, but there is a sense for Sagittarius of coming home and some opportunity in home, or getting a home even, or home improvements. Like for Scorpio right now, it's in the home, but for Sagittarius from April, there's definitely some home improvements on the cards. It goes retrograde as it does every year in your fourth house, in the home, of course, July to November. So you are going to have to redo, like that would be a good time to actually redo your home, Sagittarius. Then Saturn and Pluto in your second. This is also a more positive shift, because really Sagittarius is one of the signs that have been really dealing with it recently. They've been hemmed in with Saturn, Pluto on one side, Ketu, Mars on the other. They're still dealing with that in a way. And so this is a relief, because as soon as Saturn goes into your third, it's a better position for Saturn. Time to make more effort, time to put in Saturn to good use. Whereas in the second, it's just kind of hampering you. It's restricting you from going anywhere. And, maybe even financial issues. You can't go anywhere because you have financial issues. Like if you're not earning money. So that's better. Saturn in the third, you can, make more money and go places. So Rahu, Ketu then move from your 6th, 12th into your 5th, 11th. So this is, 5th, 11th is very much about creativity, as opposed to the 6th, 12th where you're dealing with problems. So this is also a positive. So Sagittarius, chin up, because this is a lot more positive. If it were just the fact that Jupiter is moving out of this weak position it's been in for the last 2 years, for us all, there's a sense of hope coming in April. For you, Sagittarius, this is very personally a sense of buoyancy and new hope. So that's what I mentioned there. Jupiter in his own sign, Pisces, no planets hemming your sign after April 12th. Capricorn, Saturn combusts as it is right now, just having entered combustion. This is a bit of a power struggle going on right now for you, Capricorn. January, February. So there's a general power struggle going on in the world, if you haven't noticed anyway, in leaders and in governments. But for you, Capricorn, you're personally feeling this. There's some power dynamics going on that you're having to deal with in January, February. So just be mindful of that. Saturn, of course, is in your sign, and Pluto. So you're going through huge transformations at this time, change, and you're really having to really look at yourself very closely. At the same time, you're having to look at yourself very detached. Looking at yourself closely and detached is a bit tricky, because Pluto is digging down into your subconscious and Saturn is getting you to step back and say, this is you from afar. So it's like this kind of dual aspect of Saturn, Pluto, like it is in the world, asking us to change systems. For you, Capricorn, personally, this is a systemic change. And again, wherever this sign is for you, Capricorn, in whoever's chart, this is where you're having to make these systemic changes. Then Saturn goes into your second sign. So then it's about the resources that you need to put in place to actually make those things happen. Well, I want to make this change, this personal change. Well, what do I have to do? And actually, what do I really value? If I figured out who I am now, well, I now need to figure out what do I actually really value. That's Saturn in the second. Then Saturn, as it does every year, retrogrades June to October. So just be mindful of that. It's retrograding from your second back into your first. So this question of what you value and who you are and what changes you need to make are obviously apparent every year, but more so in the last 2 years and this year because of Saturn in your sign. Very personal changes that you have to make in relation to what you value as a person. And who are you as a person anyway? Pluto retrograde every year, but again, more important because it's in your sign and it will be for many years, April to October. And again, that's unlike Saturn, which is more like an outward, systemic change. Pluto isn't like an internal systemic change that we don't see, but it's happening. It's happening in the world around us. Things are disintegrating in systems that no longer hold up to the intense cold stare of Saturn, but we don't see it crumble yet, and it will crumble at one point. And so for you, Capricorn, knowing what doesn't work for you anymore and what has to go. So Jupiter and Neptune is going from your second to your third. So this is very much about, well, you figured out what you value, then you have to work at, making things happen. But then the effort that's required and whether, you have to fight for that as well. Jupiter in the third, doesn't want to fight. It might feel like it's a bit meaningless to have to fight for something, but you do have to make effort, whether you want to call it fighting or not, or making effort. There's an effort required here. Then the nodes move from your 5th, 11th into your 4th and 2nd. So there are changes on the horizon for you in terms of your work and home life. With the nodes and the eclipses occurring here in your career and your home. And your direction in life in general, 4th and 10th. And because it's also, it's all about your first sign, there's some very personal changes happening. And of course, that will change where you are, who you are, what you're doing, and who you're doing it with. And then, of course, I'm just flagging that Rahu, Uranus, Mars in your 4th square, your ruler Saturn in July, August. So to really be mindful of the changes that are happening in the summer in your home. Big changes. Aquarius, Saturn, like Capricorn, feels the combustion, January, February, to be mindful of that always, but it's in their 12th sign. So it's maybe not only feeling sort of, combust, like feeling burnt out in a way, maybe even, but maybe feeling a bit lost as well as to where you're going, what you're doing, Aquarius, because it's in your 12th. But thankfully, Saturn moves into your 1st in the summer. So it gives you a hint at what's to come next year and what you can make out of all of this. All of the last couple of years of all this is kind of uncertainty, all of these kinds of things you've been working out, but really haven't been working out really consciously necessarily. 12th house is hidden. Is going to come more clear in the summer. And it's like, okay, this is what I have to do. And oftentimes Saturn gives you something to do in terms of it just takes other choices away. So it's like, okay, now this is what I have to do. And oftentimes we don't do something with Saturn because there's too much, and Saturn is asking us to pare it down. So this period, obviously for Aquarius, is about letting go of more things than anything this year as you step up and do something else. So what do you need to clear out? What do you need to let go of? And then what do you need to incorporate? The nodes then move into your 3rd and 9th. So they're in the 4th and 10th. So obviously there's lots of changes going on in your home and career life anyway, but then it's about making changes and about making more effort, 3rd and 9th. And maybe thinking more philosophically about things for sure, but definitely really more about the effort that's required in making anything happen in your life. And things are going to start to happen in 2022 for you, Aquarius, where they might have not really happened for you in the last 2 years. And then Jupiter and Neptune go from your 1st, which again has been your saving grace this whole period anyway, and move into your 2nd. Now, Neptune returns to your 1st until next year as well. So this is kind of like, you haven't taken the rose tinted glasses off yet, Aquarius. You haven't really looked at yourself, that starkly, but Saturn will get you to see that in the summer of 2022. And then from January 23, you'll be able to start working on yourself more and building something new. Neptune makes us dream big, especially with Jupiter. This is for everybody, by the way. Jupiter and Neptune always make us dream big, but without Saturn, we don't make it happen. So we need Saturn. Neptune is retrograde, just to mention, in your sign, then it goes back into your sign, I should say, from your 2nd sign, June to September, to the end of the year, then in your sign. So that's always a time to really look at yourself, the ideal that is you. Neptune tends to bring up sometimes an ideal, sometimes an illusion. But again, Saturn will make sure that's no longer the case from the summer. Mars, Rahu, and Uranus in your 3rd, square Saturn, your ruler in the 12th. This is where it's about give and take. Because whatever you're starting to make happen in the summer, Aquarius, you're also having to let go of a lot to make that happen. And we all have to sacrifice to make things happen. And there's something here to sacrifice. But thankfully, there's a lot more to do. You have a lot of energy to do stuff, and you want to break some boundary here. You want to break some mold here, do something new. Finally, then Pisces. Again, like Sagittarius, this is good news. Maybe even better news. Though I do feel that Sagittarius have really been under the hammer recently, and the ease upon that is really helpful for Sagittarius. For Pisces, they've been lost in many ways and not clear about where they're going. And Jupiter combust is one thing, but then Jupiter moves into your sign from the 12th to the 1st by April. So hang on in there, Pisces, basically, because by the middle of April, you've got Jupiter moving into your sign, and that is a breath of fresh air, basically. That is like a new start. And a new start after many endings and many stop starts and a lot of losses and a lot of uncertainty as to what you're going to do in your life in long term, especially. Jupiter retrogrades as it does every year, July to November in your sign. So that's something to be mindful of in terms of looking at yourself more closely and what needs to change. And of course, you'll be making changes because you'll have this sense of newness. So why wouldn't you be changing? Of course, you'll be making some personal changes. Neptune then retrogrades in your sign back to your 12th. Neptune moving into your sign in general from mid-April and then till September. You know, the summer will be a time of, I would say, dreaming big again for you personally, Pisces, where you want to really think about what is possible, what can I achieve here, who can I be? Then Saturn and Pluto are in your 11th, and Saturn then moving into your 12th. Saturn does well in the 11th, actually. It's obviously complicated with Pluto and all of that, but it's about thinking about long-term goals. And Saturn, as much as anything, is about getting rid of what doesn't work anymore to achieve long-term goals. So Saturn in the 12th, in a way, is conducive to that area where it's about letting go as you're building this, you know, new dream of who you could be. And then finally, Rahu Ketu move from your 3rd, 9th into your 2nd, 8th. So it's very much about the resources that are needed, really, and the changes that have to happen in terms of the resources that you hold, the valuables that you hold, literally even your bank balance, maybe expanding on that, really focusing on that, on building wealth so that you can be somebody new, do something else. So that's Pisces. And finally, before I wrap it up, and I know I'm just about to go over time here, I said I'd do this in 2 hours, but that was a tall ask. But we did start a bit late, so I think I might getting it in under the 2 hours all the same. These are my predictions for 2021, and just to ask, how did I do? I haven't altered this slide, so you can tell me. So basically, now one thing to say, and I'll say it again after this, is that no year exists in a vacuum. So obviously we're just leading from one year to the next and similar themes. So you can see similar themes here. I said further changes, innovations in the workplace. You didn't need to be an astrologer to work that, I guess. Further unrest, you didn't need to be an astrologer there. Stock markets continue to fluctuate. Economy challenged all year. Well, like nothing really here is a surprise, I guess. Governments change, government climate controls, conservation orders. I didn't see too much of that, to be honest. Scientific breakthroughs, yes. Technology and advancements, yes. We're going to see major technology advancements this year. New medical treatments, we did see that for sure, for obvious reasons. Challenges to the EU, I think this is ongoing, and we're going to see more and more of this. And also this 20-year curse, quote unquote, of the US president. Like I did predict about Trump being ill the year before, and of course he did get COVID, but you know, it wasn't major. Biden, though, this was a prediction I made last year, but as I mentioned last year, I didn't think it necessarily would be this last year. I actually think it's more about the end of 2022. And I've done a whole thing on his chart before. I've written an article. You can read that. Why I think it's the end of 2022. That he will not likely see out his term. Now, I don't know if I also think that maybe my new prediction on this, you'll see, is that maybe he just has to step back, maybe not down. And I'm thinking that because it's tying so much in with the midterm elections, and people are telling me that, well, the midterm elections that might show that he's not able to do his job as effectively. So maybe it's just that. I don't know. Pandemic, of course, Brexit, supply chains were a major thing with the nodes in Taurus and Scorpio. That's easing up in a way. Big industries, but there's many economic challenges to come. Big industries and governments attempt to maintain control. Obviously, uprisings continue against these controls. Obviously, big changes in China and US. Borders and boundaries continue to feel tension. Obviously, global lines, new global lines drawn. Not sure about that. Things begin to heat up in the Middle East again, well, there always are. Fires and global disasters, floods, droughts, famines, and they always are, I guess. Major attacks, cyber attacks. This is actually something I predicted that actually did happen when I thought it would, but they didn't report it until the end of the year. There was a lot of Russian attacks. Now, so I didn't, make any major predictions that would be wow, astounding, whatever. Let's see what I do this year. So 22 predictions. Let's see what I'm going to say about this year. Major catastrophic flooding and mass migration. Fires, cyber attacks, bombings, natural disasters like we haven't seen in a while. Major. Now, in a way, well, do you want that or do you want a war? Because we're going to have to experience some of that Mars energy, Mars, Uranus, Rahu. Mass protests, demonstrations, some turning violent. And I think it's going to get even more violent this year in terms of protests. Changes in governments, new movements, power to the people. This is Aquarius energy coming in. Oppositions to current leaders and the regimes. Government's controls begin to loosen in spring, summer, thankfully, but massive pushback against these restrictions in autumn, winter again. Bending, breaking the rules, confused about what the rules are in the first place. Grassroots movements, subcultures, new projects, new ideas, Aquarius. Famines, shortages, economic challenges, hyperinflation, Jupiter and Neptune in Pisces, but then also Rahu aspecting Taurus, all of this. And then, well, I won't go into 23 right now. End pandemic, end the pandemic, endemic. I might predict, I don't know if I really want to go this far, but that it would become, well, you might say that it has become endemic already. So my prediction that it's endemic, but that there would be pockets of the virus and mutations even breaking out, but that they're contained. Yet that means also more restrictions in certain parts. That's because of Saturn coming back to Capricorn, aspecting Ketu in Libra. And then all of that stuff going on in Aries. First of all, Mars meeting Saturn in April, but then later on in the summer, July, August, Mars meeting Rahu and Uranus, opposite Ketu, squaring Saturn, all of that. I mean, you could definitely see some funky stuff going on in terms of the virus in the summer, but that it may be just pockets of places. Space race and Cold War heats up. Wars and fighting possible. Drug treatments, new drug treatments, advancements, addictions, new workplace innovations, advancements in tech, AI, VR, all of that. A period of attempting to go back to quote unquote normal, not going to work. Masks gradually phased out, but many continue to use them. Biden will either step down or back, or is unable to perform his duties by the end of the year. China acts impulsively and aggressively. Russia on the verge of starting a war. Well, I mean, I'm just stating what's in the news right now, but I've been looking at this for a while. Now, I don't have a good chart for Vladimir Putin. I do have a good chart for Russia, and I do have a good chart for China, and they do look aggressive, like to the point of war. But I think that Russia, the beginning of the year, and China more the end of the year, more. That's what I'm thinking. So they're my predictions. To leave it now, just the bigger picture that we've had this Saturn Pluto for a long time, and we're still having it until 2023. So it is feeling like end times, and it's not the end times. It's just the end of this time. And it will continue to feel like that this year in a way. And it might not be for COVID, it might be for climate change, it might be for war, it might be for all these reasons. But it's not end times. It's just another thing we're going through. We had it in the 80s, we're having it again now. It's just been so drawn out now. New Cold War era, all of that. But then Saturn meets with Neptune in 25 to 28. This is interesting because it's opposite where Saturn and Neptune are in Putin's chart and in Xi Jinping's chart. The Russian and Chinese leaders have Saturn Neptune in the opposite sign where they will meet. So I just feel like by the middle of the decade, these two leaders are really challenged to change, and to step down maybe even, or just that regimes change. I don't know. But I feel like things are breaking apart by mid-decade. Uprisings galore. Jupiter would be in Cancer as well at that stage, and that actually led to the French Revolution. It wasn't Jupiter in Cancer or in Capricorn where it's at its lowest. It was Jupiter in its most hopeful position in Cancer. You don't have an uprising without hope. So mid-decade, I see major uprisings and against these regimes, against these this plutocracy and all of that. Because Jupiter will be opposite Pluto in 2025, 26. Okay, so then longer term, then Saturn, Uranus, 2030, 2035 era, that's huge changes in terms of, in Taurus and Gemini, very much about the markets and, global exchange, like economy and all of that, huge changes there. And at that time as well, Jupiter will meet with Pluto again. So another crash, another economic downfall. And, but at least at that stage, maybe there's something new coming online that if it hasn't come online by then, it has to at that point. Major economic strategies that have to completely overhaul the whole system that, begins now. Now is the falling apart of all of these kinds of economic systems. It's starting to really falter. It's not actually, wasn't the pandemic itself. It's when you try and turn on the engine of the car again that hasn't been started in 2 years and it doesn't work. And it's spluttering trying to start. And this is what we're going to feel this year, I think. So that's quite a lot, I know, a lot to take on. And it's quite an intense year, I think, in many ways. So I'll leave it there for now. Thank you for watching. If you're watching the playback, if you are watching the playback and you're not a patron already, please please go to my website, timelineastrology.com or patreon.com/timelineastrology and become a patron, a supporter. For just $5 a month, you can get exclusive access and daily reports and so much more. So thank you for listening, and I wish you all the very best for the year ahead.